This week I had a lot of really great outcomes with my clients' cases. I think I went to three immigration interviews at the New York City USCIS office, and I got some really great immigration officers who kind of knew what they were doing. They knew the law. Um, all of them told my clients at the end of the interview that they were approving their green card applications. That doesn't always happen. Even if an officer is leaning towards approving a case, they sometimes, well, actually, a lot of the time, they don't actually say that. Maybe it's because they still need to do some final background check. And I think that they don't want to commit to um, a final decision until they've given the file like one final review. But somehow this week I got really lucky. I had one officer who has been working there for a really long time. Um, he's pretty senior, and my client had a pretty complicated case, including previously being in deportation proceedings. I represented him during that part as well, and I got his deportation case dismissed. And the understanding was that at the time he had gotten married to a US citizen and he was going to move forward with filing a green card application based on the marriage. So that was the reason why the immigration judge dismissed his deportation. But the marriage did not work out. Um, Client then kind of disappeared. I didn't hear from him for about 10 years. And then after that period of time, he then reached back to me and said, "Do you remember me? I still need your help." So he came in to see me again for another consultation, explained what happened. That marriage did not work out. He eventually divorced that spouse, but then he actually got me married to his current US citizen spouse. So, client hired me again. Um, and we filed an adjustment application based on his current marriage. So that was the interview that was scheduled. Um, and another issue in his case was that when he originally entered the United States, he actually was sponsored by a previous spouse um, for a green card, and that marriage also didn't work out. Um, so that marriage also turned out to be abusive. And my client ended up losing all of his biographic documents. He was not able to keep the passport and the visa that he entered the US on. So, one of the requirements to adjust status is that you have to prove that you were either admitted and inspected into the United States or you were paroled into the US. So the fact that he didn't have the physical proof of how he entered the United States was something that I knew could be an issue. So we filed an I-102, which is an application to replace a missing I-94. Filed it with immigration. Immigration denied it, saying, you, according to our records, were already granted permanent residence. Therefore, you don't qualify to file an I-102. Only a non-immigrant can apply. So we went into the interview with all of these issues, and I was a little worried that the officer would be confused or would not believe my client's story, that he does not have the original passport that he had when he entered the United States. But this officer reviewed the entire file, saw that I tried to obtain a duplicate I-94. I also included other evidence of how my client entered. I filed a FOIA with the State Department, and I was able to get some records from the US Embassy in his home country, which confirmed that they issued him a CR1 visa, which is a visa for a spouse to enter the United States um, on a conditional 2-year basis. I also provided a copy of the NTA, which is a notice to appear, which is the charging document that immigration serves on a client when they are seeking to deport them. And on that NTA, one of the charges or allegations is that my client entered with a CR1 visa on such and such date, such and such place. And that was another document that I submitted saying, well, here is proof that even within your own agency, you admit that he was admitted into the United States on this conditional resident visa. So the interviewing officer didn't raise any of those issues, said, he totally understood. And he only asked a few questions about my client's adjustment eligibility, which is something that's also unusual. During these adjustment interviews, especially during this administration, a lot of immigration officers are literally asking every single question on the 485 form. This particular officer only asked my client maybe 5 or 6 questions and basically said, yeah, this is fine. I'm going to approve the I-130. I'm going to approve your adjustment. You will get the official approval notice as of tomorrow. And lo and behold, the next day I checked and indeed, the case was updated. The I-130 and the 485 were approved. So now my client should be receiving his green card in the mail in a few days. So that ended a 20+ year ordeal where my client initially came to the United States in around 2001 or 2002. And all this time, he just was in this indefinite limbo status because of everything that happened to him. So at the end of the interview, he admitted to me that he was so nervous that he was not able to sleep for the last 6 weeks. I could also see that he was shaking during the interview, and I just basically said to him, look, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. I prepped him and his wife before their interview. So, it all worked out in the end, and I'm super happy that I was able to help my client finally become a green card holder. I also had 2 adjustment interviews in the USCIS New York City office. Both interviews were on the same day, and their interviews were scheduled about 3 hours apart, but there was no guarantee that I would be done with interview number 1 in time to attend interview number 2, just because when you are scheduled for an interview with immigration, the wait time can be anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 to 3 hours. So there was a chance that by the time my second clients were called for their interview, then I still could be stuck at my first interview. So luckily, it all worked out. Both of the adjustments were based on marriage to a citizen. And for one of my clients, he had been out of status in the United States since 1994, I believe, so quite a while ago. And he was really nervous, obviously, understandably, just because of all the stories about clients showing up at green card interviews and then being detained by ICE and then, put into deportation proceedings. So for that client, he did initially entered on a visitor visa when he was a child, basically. His parent brought him here. And he has been in the US ever since. So that basically means growing up in a country where he was not able to get any kind of immigration status up until he got married to his US citizen spouse. There was no other qualifying way to get a green card. And he also spent several decades not having proper ID. Couldn't get a social security number, couldn't get a driver's license, not with an expired visitor visa. So he was very nervous on the day of the interview. We got incredibly lucky. We had a very understanding, nice immigration officer. I prepped my client and his wife very well for the interview. We submitted pretty decent documents that the marriage was genuine. And the USCIS officer, I have to say, she was great. She asked a few questions about the marriage. Um, she even said she was going to approve the green card application without asking for any joint documents. I offered to give them to this officer, and she said, I don't really need them, um, which is really unusual. And then basically said, I'm approving the application. You should get the approvals next day. And that later turned out to be true. I checked the receipt notices the next day, and both the I-130 and the 485 were approved. So the more interesting thing is that when I stuck around at immigration to wait for my second client's interview, um, we waited, I think, close to 2 hours to be called. And when you're sitting there in the waiting room, um, you're not sure what officer is going to call you. Are they going to be nice? Are they going to be mean? And as I'm watching the immigration officers come into the waiting room and calling people, I've been going to this particular immigration office for more than 25 years. After a while, you get to recognize who the officers are. You know that some of them are nice and they know what they're doing. And at the same time, you know which officers are not so nice. There are some that are very hostile. I will say for the New York field office, for the most part, they have very good officers. But there's a few, I think, who, I've encountered who just don't know why, but they've always been super hostile to clients and attorneys. And one of those hostile attorneys was one of the officers calling clients. And every time that officer came in, I would just kind of cringe and then, hope that she wouldn't call. Luckily, my clients did not get called by that officer. And the more amazing thing is that the same officer that conducted the first interview called my clients, the second clients again. And when she saw me, she said, "Why are you still here?" And I said, "Well, that's because USCIS, scheduled two clients of mine for adjustment interviews, and I feel like we hit the jackpot when you called us." So that case was also approved. Same thing. The officer just asked a few questions regarding the marriage. Didn't ask for any joint documents. I mean, we submitted some initial joint documents with the filing of the I-130 and 485, which the officer uh, deemed to be sufficient. And, for that client, same thing. The next day, the cases were approved, and now all of my clients are waiting just for their green cards to be delivered to them in the mail. So very good week. Super happy for all of my clients, especially the ones who have been waiting literally decades to obtain immigration status.